So imagine this. For 16 straight years, a woman chose not to eat a single bite of food or drink a single drop of water. She only survived because she was force-fed through a tube. Now, you might hear that and think, wow, that's something out of a history book. But the thing is, it's 2026, and her fight, the fight of Irom Sharmila, is more urgent than it's ever been. We're going to dive into why her defiance is still sending shockwaves through the system today.
5,746. Just look at that number. That's how many days Irom Sharmila was on her hunger strike. I mean, really let that sink in. That's nearly 16 years. But you've got to understand, this wasn't just a fast. No, this was a deliberate political act, a protest. She refused to eat, and the state's response was to keep her alive by force, literally pumping food through a tube in her nose. And this isn't some old story we're digging up. The echoes of her protest are shaping the incredibly violent conflicts happening in that region right now, as we speak in 2026. And that really brings us to the heart of what we're talking about today. Is it even possible for one woman's silence to be louder than an army? Can a single person's protest, no matter how determined, really challenge a government that's armed to the teeth with legal immunity? And now, as Manipur is burning through this new, absolutely brutal chapter of violence, you have to ask, what did her sacrifice actually change?
All right, so to really get this, we need to rewind. Let's go all the way back to the beginning. To understand her 16-year silence, you first have to understand the one single event that sparked it all. So picture this, November 2nd, 2000. A normal day at a bus stop in a place called Malom in Manipur. And then a paramilitary unit opens fire. 10 civilians are killed. No warning, no questions asked, just bullets. Among the dead, a 62-year-old woman and an 18-year-old kid who just won a National Bravery Award. Just 2 days after this massacre, a 28-year-old activist, Irom Sharmila, decided she'd had enough. She began a fast, and her demand was so simple: get rid of the law that lets this happen. And what did the state do? They arrested her for attempting to commit suicide. You know, this quote from Sharmila just says it all. My position was like a bird who had shattered her wings. And for the next 16 years, that's exactly what it was like. She was held in a hospital room, and her protest was basically neutralized by that feeding tube. The state kept her body alive, but they tried to silence her politically. She became this living symbol, trapped in this bizarre cycle of being arrested, released, and then immediately rearrested, year after year after year. So, what exactly is this law? The one she spent nearly 2 decades of her life fighting against? Well, let's break it down. We're talking about an act that essentially creates what a lot of people call a state of exception, a place where the normal rules, the normal laws just don't apply. It's called the Armed Forces Special Powers Act. You'll hear it called AFSPA. It was passed way back in 1958, and it gives the military some pretty incredible powers in any area that the government decides to label as disturbed. And what that really means is it lets soldiers operate above the law, all in the name of public order. Okay, now look at the details here, because this is where it gets really wild. Section 4A gives soldiers the power to shoot to kill, just based on suspicion. Not proof, suspicion. Section 4C lets them arrest anyone, anytime, without a warrant. But the real kicker? That's Section 6. This one gives soldiers almost complete legal immunity. If you want to prosecute a soldier for something they've done, you need special permission from the central government. And guess how often that permission is granted? Almost never. And this is what creates what activists call a culture of impunity. And this quote from activist Bablu Loitongbam, man, it just hits you right in the gut. He says it created a new category of Indian citizens who are killable people, rapeable women. Think about that. When a government gives its own soldiers the power to kill without any real consequences, it changes the fundamental value of a person's life in that area. That is the reality Irom Sharmila was fighting. So after 16 years of this fast, with the government basically ignoring her, Sharmila did something nobody saw coming. She made a truly shocking pivot. She decided to change her whole strategy, to move from the protest in that hospital ward to the political arena. So, in August 2016, she announced she was ending her fast. Her reasoning was that people had turned her into an icon, but they weren't turning her protest into a real mass movement. So she came up with a new plan. She was going to run for office, become the chief minister of Manipur, and get rid of AFSPA herself.
She decided to trade in her title as a living martyr to become a politician. And the result? Well, take a look. It's staggering. In the 2017 election, she went head-to-head with the incumbent chief minister, a guy who'd been in power for 3 terms. He pulled in over 18,000 votes. And Irom Sharmila, the Iron Lady of Manipur, famous all over the world, she got 90 votes. 90. No, that's not a typo. Just 90. She didn't just lose. She was absolutely obliterated. So what happened? Why did people reject her so completely? This quote, again from Bablu Loitongbam, really gets to the core of it. He said, "Our mistake was that we eulogized her so much. She didn't want to be a god. She wanted to be a human." You see, the public had put her on this pedestal. She was this pure, untouchable symbol of resistance. But when she decided to step down, to become a real person who wanted to get into the messy world of politics, who wanted a family, many of her followers felt let down, almost betrayed. It seems they preferred the goddess in the hospital room to the human on the campaign trail. Now, after Sharmila stepped away from the political spotlight, you might think the story ends there. But the issues she was fighting against, they didn't just go away. In fact, they just sat there and festered under the surface until they finally exploded into the crisis that has completely engulfed Manipur today. Let's get up to speed. In May of 2023, all-out ethnic violence erupted between 2 of the state's main communities, the Métis and the Kuki-Zo. Things got so bad, so completely out of control, that by February 2025, the local government had totally collapsed. The central government had to step in and impose direct rule. Now, here in 2026, there's a fragile new government in place. But let's be clear, the state is broken, and the wounds are still raw. The human toll? We're talking more than 260 people killed. Over 60,000 people have been displaced, forced to flee their homes. And get this, more than 6,000 high-powered weapons were looted from police armories. This has turned a simmering ethnic conflict into something that looks a lot like a civil war. And this right here is the absolute key to understanding why her legacy is so important now. Think about it. Sharmila's struggle was vertical. It was the people versus the state, a nonviolent fight against an unjust law. But this new war? It's horizontal. It's one ethnic group against another, a brutally violent conflict. And they're using the exact same tactics of violence and impunity that the state itself had normalized for all those years. Which brings us full circle, right back to 2026, and why we need to talk about Irom Sharmila's legacy. Because her fight, her story, it's like a blueprint. It helps us understand not just what went so wrong, but also what the future might look like. Look, her legacy is so critical right now because the problems she pointed to never actually got solved. They just mutated. That culture of impunity we talked about, the one born from AFSPA, it ended up teaching a whole generation that violence is a perfectly fine way to solve problems. So when ethnic tensions finally reached a boiling point, what happened? Both sides reached for the same playbook of violence that the state had been using for decades. Her entire protest was a warning against a system that always chooses the gun over the conversation, and now we're all seeing the devastating results of that choice. And that leaves us with a really tough question for the world we live in today. In our age of social media, disinformation, of heavily armed militias, is the Sharmila method, that solitary, moral, nonviolent protest, is that still even possible? Can it work? Or has the world just changed too much? And maybe the biggest thing her story leaves us with is this. Irom Sharmila kept her protest going for 16 years. 16 years. Most of that time was spent in total isolation, long after the TV cameras and international journalists had all gone home. And it really makes you ask yourself, what would you sacrifice for something you believe in when the spotlight of the world has moved on and you're the only one left watching?